what's happening is that you're learning with a trainer, and the trainer becomes the master and you're the apprentice. And this particular photo was taken at the Texas plant, and just happened to be somebody who was teaching me how they taught problem solving during the recession when they had people employed and they weren't making trucks and they were just teaching them every day. But again, the role of the mentor is to challenge you, challenge the way you think, challenge the way you act, and to give you assignments, and to then watch you carefully, much of the time not giving you any feedback at all and letting you struggle. And then eventually they will give you feedback and they'll give you a concrete assignment. If you think about being a blacksmith or being a carpenter back in the old days, where your father might drop you off at the local blacksmith and turn you over to the master blacksmith, and now you're nothing. You're just, you're actually kind of the property of that master. And you do exactly what the master says, and your advancement to eventually become a master blacksmith, so you can set up your own shop, depends upon that master. He's got complete control. That kind of a relationship that was very common a few hundred years ago, that never really left Toyota. It's not as defined as I'm dropped off and you're my master, but it is expected that when you have a new job, that there's somebody to teach you, and it's usually your boss. If you're on a special project, it might be somebody who's an expert at the Toyota production system, and they're teaching you some aspect of TPS. But there's somebody who's responsible for training and developing you, and you treat them with the same respect that the apprentice would treat the master. Lately, there's been kind of a spread, a popular movement of what's called leader standardized work. In fact, in many cases, there's a simplistic assumption. Again, we tend to think in terms of simple cause and effect. I do this project, I get this return on investment. In leader standardized work, what we often think of is that we want to be a lean leader. Somebody gives us standard work to perform, to learn to be a leader. We follow the standardized work and we're a leader. Usually the standardized work involves going to the Gemba and asking some questions and making some observations. In reality, leader standardized work is a good concept. What we're really referring to is repetitive patterns of activities that represent the current best way of planning and controlling business processes. Okay, so there is a part of every leader's job that can be made to be routine. What we show here is that the percentage that's repetitive as compared to the percentage that is unique work particular to that job is going to vary depending on the position. And basically, as you go higher in the organization, more of what you have to do is to react to unique circumstances and know how to react in the proper way. And the lower you go, the more of your job is routine. So for example, for a team leader in Toyota, which would be an hourly employee who's given extra responsibilities, and they're off the line, and they're responding, for example, to and-on calls. They pulls a cord, a light goes on. They can be trained in a lot of detail about how to respond to an and-on call. What happens when the light goes on? Now you're the object. The spotlight's on you as a team leader. The team member simply pulls the cord. He's done. He's called attention to the problem. Now there's a spotlight on you as a team leader, where you have to jump into action. What do you do? And again, you can be trained in that in a fairly routine way, even though every situation that you face on the line will be different. But what happens if there's a missing part? What happens if the team member made a quality error? How do you judge when you need to allow the line to actually stop versus when you can pull the cord a second time and solve the problem while the car is moving down the line? What do you do if the problem is bigger than you and you can't handle it and you have to call for help? So there's defined routines for dealing with those situations, even though there's also improvisation. There's also routine things that you do as a team leader, like check to see if the tools themselves are within the quality range. For example, is the torque on the torque wrench within the acceptable range? So you're making quality checks. You're collecting data that's posted on the team meeting board. So there's a lot of routine activities. There's things that you should look for before the shift starts. You come early as a team leader, and everything should be set up right so that when the line starts, everything's ready to go. So we're saying here roughly that maybe 80% of your job can be taught and is fairly repetitive, and there's about 20% where it's a totally unique situation. The machine crashes in a way that you've never seen before, and you have to be extremely creative. The group leader, we're suggesting it's more like 50-50. The group leader is the first line supervisor. And as you go up to a manager level, we're saying maybe only 20% of what you do is repetitive. And 80% is adapting to circumstances, adapting to people's needs. What we're really arguing with leader standardized work is that even if you're a manager and only 20% of your work is routine, if you can standardize that 20%, you don't have to really think about it, right? That's 20% of 1 day's worth of work out of a 5-day week of stuff that you can just do automatically. And that's the part you want to standardize. For the other parts, that's why you need to learn, like we saw over time with a mentor over many years through on-the-job development. What you're learning are the tacit parts of the job, the parts that can't be written down procedurally. The tacit parts you learn through experience of dealing with more and more different circumstances, and you develop a repertoire of skills that allow you to deal with that employee that repetitively doesn't show up to work, or with that machine that breaks down in a spectacular way and it could shut down production for the whole day, or the vendor who misses a shipment. You've done that many times before, even though each situation is unique. They're similar to what you've done in the past. So you're developing a repertoire of skills for the 80% and some very routine, specific, repetitive work where you could write down the procedure. So what do we mean by leader standardized work?
If this manager here, you're showing it as blue, which means that you should standardize that 20% of the work. This assistant manager, you should standardize that 25%. And for the group leader, who's, I think this is the group leader, you got 50-50 scenario there, right?
Right, and then the team leader's in white because the team leader's really not a formal manager.
Right.
They're an hourly worker, but they also would have 80%. These are just rough numbers, but they would have about 80% of their work would be quite standard and routine. So what you're trying to do is identify the repetitive portions of the job. And for those repetitive portions, you're trying to standardize it, even write it down. And anybody who's in that job can be taught that when they enter that job. They could be taught those routine aspects. The rest of the job, they're going to have to learn through experience. And they've already been learning a lot of those skills that will allow them to deal with the sudden situations that are each unique, that they're facing constantly through the day. And what might take somebody 4 hours to do, as you experience it 10 years later, you're doing in 15 minutes because you have developed your own habits, your own routines for handling those things. You can identify, like a master chess player. He looks at a board, he knows exactly what the situation is at a glance, and he can start thinking about his move. And he knows different kinds of moves and different strategies for this situation, just at a glance. the novice has to look at every single piece and try to figure out all the different ways the opponents can move. So the master chess player has a lot of templates and routines in his head. But if you were to try to write all those down, which some people do, it would take hundreds of pages and maybe not even worth doing.
So this would be an example of a daily round that the plant manager is walking through the plant, and you'll see the president of the Toyota plants, the presidents will make a daily walk. And it's just part of their routine. They'll do it every day unless there's some emergency. And this is the area they've decided I'm going to do a deep dive for this work group. I'm going to spend more time, and they'll change that every day. And then every place they go, there's things that they're looking for. They have something that they've been focusing on. And for example, in HR, it might be the hiring plan. And they're going to be asking questions about that. And if it's visual and if they can see the status, then it's much easier for them to ask the right questions and challenge the thinking of people. This is a necessary step, but it's only a step until leaders naturally become lean leaders, until they've developed to the point where they just do this and they don't need it written down and they don't need it to become formal, written, standardized work. In the book, we make a little bit disparaging analogy and say it's like training wheels on a bicycle. It will help you to learn, but at some point somebody's got to give you a push without the training wheels where you're actually riding the bike.